Hello and welcome to the Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's film is Hardware, the sci-fi horror from 1990 that follows a self-repairing military battle cyborg that goes on a rampage in a post-apocalyptic slum. Starring Dylan McDermott and Stacey Travis, Hardware marked the feature film debut of celebrated cult film director Richard Stanley. And joining me today to talk about all things Hardware is Bryn Tilly. He's the founder and director of the Dark Nights Film Festival, with the second volume launching now, available October 9 to 12 at Randwick Ritz. You can go to darknightsfilmfest.com. I really recommend everyone that's just like Bryn and myself are into these underground exploitation, horror, cult films, sci-fi films as well. We love them, we breathe them, we talk about them, we live them. And Dark Nights Film Fest is a great example of someone who really put their money where their mouth is and put it to the screen for people to enjoy on cinema screens as well, might I say, which is really great. One of those movies I'm looking forward to seeing, hopefully. Brain Dead, the 4K restore, which I know that you're going to have there as well. So, Bryn Tilly, congratulations to you with the launch of Volume 2, and thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Matthew. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Yes, very excited about Dark Nights Film Fest program. A lot of great stuff in the program, even though it's just a small festival, over 4 days and just a handful of features and a handful of shorts. But I'm very proud about the program, and it's taken me 4 years to get Brain Dead. So I'm very, very happy to get to screen that. First time, I think, on Australian cinemas in 30 years. So that's very exciting.
From talking about one classic genre movie to another, Hardware, Richard Stanley's feature film directorial debut, released in 1990. I believe this week it's going to have its anniversary. I think it'll be 35 years this week. This is a movie to me, Bryn, that's really kind of new to me. Like, I know of the film, I know of Richard Stanley and such, but I haven't watched this film until like in the last year or so. It was the first time I kind of watched it. There's a lot of reasons for that. It wasn't available for a long time as well, and that was a big thing. And when Broly kind of had it on their streaming service, and I know Umbrella Entertainment released their kind of remaster and everything, that's when I finally got a chance to watch it. And it's a movie that's incredibly fascinating to watch. And I'm just curious for yourself, though, Bryn, when was the first time you watched Hardware? Do you remember?
Yes, I mean, look, I didn't see it in the cinema. It did get a release. I'm from New Zealand. It did get a theatrical release in New Zealand, but I didn't see it at the time in the cinema. I caught up with it on VHS through the 90s, somewhere probably the early 90s. I caught up with it, and yes, like you say, I mean, it's a fascinating film full of so many influences and inspirations, and such a mixed bag of all sorts of ideas. It certainly felt very much at the time on VHS to be part of that big boom that had started in the 80s and was continuing through. Uh, it didn't, of course, get a DVD release until around 2009 due
Hmm.
to copyright issues and all that had been caught up in. Uh, the interesting thing in New Zealand, it was uncut in the cinema, given a classification of an R18, whereas in Australia, I believe the theatrical was cut, but then the VHS was
This is
so
you were saying before about like the kind of like the 80s VHS kind of boom as well. It's another thing about the 80s that I find really interesting in regards to this film. I mean, of course, this movie came out in 1990, but it does have like the 80s kind of aesthetic towards it, this whole cyberpunk kind of thing. 80s was really kind of like a decade of robots in movies, and there's all kind of like all you could go for all kinds from Blade Runner to Terminator, RoboCop. There's one movie that I kind of, if you're going to do a double bill for this movie, and this might seem like a weird kind of choice for it, this movie kind of feels like the inverse, kind of like the inverted cross of what Short Circuit was from 1986.
uh,
In that movie, you have Johnny Five dancing with Ali Sheedy to like the Bee Gees, where in this movie you got the Mark 13 trying to kill I'm just trying to get the actress's name here. Stacey Travis was in this movie. And it's kind of like it was almost kind of like, I don't know if he had saw it. In none of my research, I would have seen that he had have seen in Short Circuit, probably didn't. But I guess he would have known that maybe around that time that maybe the robots are getting a little too cute and cuddly, and he just wanted to bring back a little more grit and violence to the proceedings.
Certainly, certainly. No, I didn't see Short Circuit at the time when it came out. I think I thought it was looked way too cute for my tastes. Um, but most definitely, you can easily make a comparison or a contrast between the two. On one hand, you've got a very a very cute and lovable robot on the loose. In hardware, it's a very menacing, a very malevolent robot on the loose doing different things. And so there's definitely, yeah, that interesting comparison. You know, uh, Richard was interested in obviously a lot of things that were going on around and using the robot as this kind of this vessel for evil. Though it's interesting to note, though, that he didn't see the robot as evil by nature, but evil by
No,
design.
yeah. He always, I saw this interesting quote he had where it's like the robot seemed to be just always just following the light because he has that kind of UV sense of thing. So he was just following where the programming told him where to go. And there's an interesting scene in the movie where Stacey Travis's character tries to communicate with him, and he can't communicate with some with something with such hardwired program, so to speak, in the film. The making of this film is interesting because it's almost like two stories kind of coinciding to make this film. One is the story of Richard Stanley, and one's the story about the rights being sold to a film that he had no idea that the rights being sold when he's in Afghanistan, deep within a documentary filmmaking, embedded with a Afghani guerrilla group over there. So for people who don't know, Richard Stanley, he's a South African born director, grew up in the 70s, 80s in South Africa. And he was talking about how there was a time there, especially he couldn't trust the institutions or the media, and he felt like there was he said, a gut sensation that the entire society is about to crumble. That was kind of like where he kind of thought of the idea for hardware, in that he wanted the first world to kind of behave like the third world. So the movie's really interesting in that. It's like, I think at first it was supposed to be based in England, and afterwards with financing they changed it to America. You don't really kind of get a sense throughout the
No,
film.
you don't. It is somewhere in a lost zone in a sense, or maybe interzone if William S. Burroughs reference there. But indeed, he did obviously shoot it in London in a massive warehouse. Most of the interiors were in a warehouse, and that's where he initially thought the whole film would be set. But of course, with Miramax coming on board and doing the bulk of the financing, they were insistent that it become more Americanized. And certainly that came down to the casting of the lead roles. Their demands, changed that and forced Richard Stanley to even have it to rewrite some of it to adapt to and accommodate what the Weinstein brothers were wanting.
There's a Super 8 film that he made when he was 14 called Incidents in the Expanding Universe. That was 1985. That's kind of like the roots, the threads of what he wanted to make with this movie. And he'd also say later that he was in South Africa. He was drafted into the army there. He fled. He went to London. When he went to London, he kind of developed a reputation of as a music director and such. He's working on the script. He's constantly getting his scripts rejected. And he was saying that the notes that people always get back to him is they want, a chainsaw, a shower scene, a cliffhanger, and a fire starter. So he said, okay, I'm going to put them all in one film. And he said he wrote it in a week while listening to Iron Maiden's Flash of the Blade again and again. And Flash of the Blade, I think, was used in one of the Argento films. I think it might have been Phenomenon, but I'm not.
Phenomena, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is it's funny because there's another connection to phenomena later on we can talk about here. Then he goes over to Afghanistan. So at the time in Afghanistan, the Soviets were finding Afghanistan. Anyone who knows Rambo 3 knows a little bit about that. He's making a documentary over there. I think it was called A Voice of the Moon. So he's kind of embedded within this guerrilla group in Afghanistan. So while that's happening, in the UK, his scripts floated around London, and it gets in the hand of this guy named Trix Worrell. And Trix Worrell passes off to this guy named Paul Tribbets, and he's a producer. Paul Tribbets sells the option to someone named Stephen Woolley, who's one of the founders of Palace Pictures, will later become Scala Pictures. So all of this is happening without Richard knowing what's going on. Joanne Seller also comes on. She's a co-founder of Palace Pictures. She comes on. She's very much hands on deck kind of stuff. But they have to try to get him back. So they go over there. They get him back. He's like, I don't want to leave. I'm doing something important. He goes, no, we just sold your film, so you got to come back and make it. That's as crazy a story as I've ever heard of someone, number one, selling their film without having known they sold their film, and number two, being brought from one extreme to another, and almost kind of feels like the Richard Stanley story, just overall when you just look at his kind of whole career, kind of as a whole here.
From one war zone to another, in a sense, because of course in one way, obviously he had a certain amount of creative reign, but he was constantly being harassed by Miramax, who kept insisting on putting things into the film that they felt, like you said earlier, that they felt were important. Make it more like a slasher flick. We want more sleaze. We want this, we want that, and so he was constantly having to try and adapt. And yet, at the same time, he had a vision. He had something he wanted to say. He was trying to reflect very much what was going on in England, as well as what he'd come from, the apartheid system in South Africa, but then also the fascism, the Thatcherism that was right at the tail end in England. And yet at the same time, knowing, if I want this film to be seen by a lot of people, I'm going to have to comply to what the Miramax guys, want to a degree.
You were saying before how he kind of goes from one battle zone to another. He kind of says that he didn't know much about PTSD at the time, but like he kind of used like all those kind of that stuff that he had for the war zone in the production itself, and it was a really kind of interesting production. I mean, it was like originally the movie was supposed to be set in England. They changed the kind of the setting, but the location was in London. It was the so I could see here the Roundhouse,
Hmm.
Spiller's Wharf in East London. Opening scene was in Morocco, which funny enough as well. Supposedly when they went over there, it hadn't rained there in like 55 years, and then a monsoon kind of hits just to continue with the whole Richard
Always
Stanleyism of it all.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, always. The Roundhouse at the time, they said, was a complete shell, absolutely empty. It was derelict, but the sound was terrible, and you can
Yeah,
hear the trains going past. However, it was a big space where they can kind of use this kind of stuff. It's kind of like almost like a playground where you can kind of make this future, council kind of what have you kind of in there. And I think it looks great in the movie. I mean, there's a style to the film that definitely you could kind of feel it. It's palpable. It lives and breathes. It's kind of like it's very gritty. There's a grittiness to it. And I think just the way where they made it and how they made it, of course, with a budget of 1.5 million, you kind of feel that when watching the film.
for sure, for sure. I mean, yeah, definitely. But the fact that they were able to shoot in this warehouse, of course, meant that they had complete control over lighting, and it is very much a lit film. And certainly Stanley's background in music videos came to thing, and in some ways, the whole film almost feels like a very long music video. It's
Hmm.
so stylized. So particular, its use of music, obviously Simon Boswell's score, but the use of the sourced music, the needle drops, and it enabled him to create this very claustrophobic set. Of course, as you mentioned, uh, due to the location, and even though they were inside, the sound was unusable, and so they had to actually redo the entire sound, dialogue and Foley, post production.
Hi guys, Matt here from Matt's Movie Reviews, letting you know that the Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel has launched channel membership. This provides exclusive videos and other cool stuff as well for all channel members. It's under one tier, one price, and with that one price you get exclusive reviews. For example, I'll be going through the American Film Institute's top 100 movies. So every week I'll do a new review based on that movie list. You can get exclusive reviews based on your requests. Request a movie review and I will review it for you. You'll also get exclusive content for behind the scenes stuff as well. You also get exclusive interviews that I haven't posted yet as part of my podcast, like older interviews with Academy Award winners and other great filmmakers and actors as well, and a bunch of other cool stuff as well. I hope you can all join up, be part of this great experience I have an offer for you. Support indie content creators, support a movie critic like myself who is trying to make it through the content creator space. Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel memberships. Please join and get some great exclusive content. As I just want to go back to the whole kind of Palace Pictures, Scala Pictures kind of part of it. As someone such as yourself who is into kind of like very much genre exploitation kind of film, how important is the whole Scala Pictures, Palace Pictures kind of institution as a whole to the whole kind of landscape of those type of genres of cinema?
Hugely, hugely important, especially to Generation X who grew up with those the Palace Pictures VHS. I mean, obviously, I didn't grow up in England, so I wasn't familiar so much, obviously, with Scala Theatre, but it's certainly the Palace Pictures VHS releases were very dominant in the video stores of the 80s and very much a particular aesthetic, a particular vibe. You knew looking at a Palace Pictures VHS cover that you were likely to get something that was a bit edgier,
Mm.
possibly transgressive, using exploitation elements, certainly adult fare.
I want to talk about the casting, and we spoke about the Miramax influence. The biggest influence, especially, was for the main lead character, Moses Hardbo Baxter, this kind of like the space marine scavenger kind of guy. So the role was originally written where he's so much more of a like so. Dylan McDermott, how he plays is kind of like a lovable kind of scoundrel kind of thing. But the original like interpretation that Richards had for it was a real scumbag, junkie
Mhm.
kind of thing. He wasn't even a space marine. He was lying about that. That wasn't a part of it at all. But when Dylan McDermott comes onto the scene, he's got good looks. He's like jacked. He's big. He's got the crew cut, everything. So they kind of had to shift it around. A lot of people would know the actor more from his TV work, like on the Practice was especially huge and all that. I always find it funny and but also just fascinating sometimes when you watch these early genre exploitation films of these big kind of actors who they start off on a small kind of screen. And Dylan McDermott, like I thought he was quite funny in it, very much in almost in I don't know. I think he might have been channeling a little bit of Bill Paxton there, here and there while watching it because he was kind of like the go-to guy in it. But I thought he was fine in it as a lead, but you could kind of see that at the same time, maybe his kind of uh, his persona as he is probably wasn't very much a Richard Stanley kind of like something that he envisioned for the film.
No, no, no. Like you say, the role originally was a much more damaged, weary, jaded, a junkie character, and in casting Dylan, suddenly, yeah, this buff, good-looking uh, actor who certainly very charismatic on screen, and he's then playing this kind of cowboyish kind of role, and yet, what comes through is still the core essence of the character. He is one who is troubled and weakened. Certainly Stacey Travis's role is, I think, ultimately a stronger role,
Hmm.
and comes through that way. She's much more of a survivalist, but Dylan definitely brings, I think, a sly sense of humor to the role, which is brilliant. Apparently, he also suggested the reading from the Bible
Yes.
stuff that comes into it. Um, so it's interesting the compromise, and sometimes, as we know, some great stuff in films comes from directors being forced to compromise. Who knows what Bill Paxton might have brought to the role? It look, I think there would have been more of a vulnerability, I think, with Bill Paxton. Um, Instead, Dylan brings what he brings. To everyone who kind of saw when it came out, of course, they didn't really know Dylan. He'd been in some small roles. Hamburger Hill, I think,
Hmm.
was one of them, and of course would go on to being much more well known, like you said, in The Practice, and so forth. So in that sense, it's you could see obviously Miramax were like definitely trying to kind of create a star.
The Mark 13 quote of no flesh would be saved, but for the
Spared.
sake of the elect. No fish spared. Okay,
Yeah.
for the sake of the elect. Now, yeah, as you said, he brought that up. But what's kind of interesting about it is that the robot is named Mark 13.
Hmm.
Um, Richard Stanley insists that in no way whatsoever, when he named him Robot Mark 13, did he even think about anything biblical whatsoever. So when Dylan McDermott, who at the time Richard Stanley said was like reading the Bible like daily and such, like he looked it up and then he said, "Hey, check this out," and they kind of just put it in there, which worked out quite well. When I was doing the deep dive into this and trying to find as many documentaries and interviews as I can, um, Dylan McDermott was not in any of them whatsoever. And I was trying really hard to try to find something in regards to him of his experience with it. And I actually did find some stuff, very small, but very direct. So he had a movie called The Messengers or The Messenger that came out 2009, had Kirsten Dunst in it, a horror film. So when journalists, especially from more like, fanboyish kind of like blogs or websites or whatever, would bring up hardware, he was very, very dismissive of it. He'd say stuff like, was not a great horror movie. The only thing he thought about when he looks back at it is that it was painful, that movie, everything about it. And I guess I can see what he means in that 1.5 million budget, but also like that grittiness and such in it as well. I imagine a lot of people on that movie would have had to like get down and dirty and really do their own stuff. I know Stacey Travis, she said that she definitely did a lot of her stuff, but she, by all accounts, which we'll get to soon, she very much enjoyed that experience, whereas Dylan, not so much there. And yeah, I think you could just kind of tell there's a little bit of, yeah, maybe his own little PTSD that comes from working on that movie.
I believe also he'd been dumped by Julia Roberts, his girlfriend,
Ah.
prior to coming on board. And as such, I think that colored his overall mood, which perhaps, when he reflects back on that, he associates the two in that respect. And perhaps that colors his recollections of making the film. But I think he did a great job. Yeah.
I think yeah, solid as well. But the MVP definitely was Stacey Travis as Jill in the movie. So Richard Stanley said that he fought really hard to get her in the role.
Hmm.
He said he fell in love with her cheeks and eyes, and he offered her the role on the condition that she dyed her hair red, which she said yes. But there was a lot of pushback from that. So while he was kind of like had all his focus on fighting for her to get her in the role with the red hair and everything, like everything else was kind of cast around her. But it's great that she's in this film. I think she was absolutely fantastic. She said that she loved the script. She found it interesting, suspenseful. But what she really liked is that, especially back, you got to think maybe when they made their films 89. Movie comes out in 1990. That kind of strong, independent woman. Her words here, slightly aggressive kind of characters that don't come along very often. And I'm trying to think back at that timeline. Like you have Ripley of Aliens fame,
Hmm.
1986. You did have the first Terminator, but the action Linda Card, sorry, Linda,
Linda Hamilton.
the Linda Hamilton, thank you, for Terminator 2 will be a year after. So this nestles really in between there. And I think that she's kind of like really like cult film people will know this, but when it comes to like the action heroine, kind of like in the movie, kind of like sci-fi horror movie, especially, she nestles in there quite well and it's very kind of like an unsung performance because I think she's fantastic in the film.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's a shame in some ways that she didn't go into even more
Mm.
prominent stuff. She's certainly a star in that film, and it is like you said, and it's a great role as well. There's lots of nuances in it. I love the fact that she's this industrial artist as well.
Mm.
Working away there. You almost want to kind of see more of that side of which we don't see a lot of, but I always found that quite fascinating, that element to it.
You mentioned before how Dylan McDermott kind of broke up with Julia Roberts, and there was kind of like emotional baggage that came with that. So Stacey said that her mother passed away just before filming began, and so she used what she called a well of rage for a lot of scenes, especially a scene where she has that baseball bat. She's just destroying the Mark 13 robot. She said she just hit it so hard she actually broke the bat from doing that. But it's a great scene like that. Like it's that this woman's being tormented throughout this film, and she finally gets a chance to just destroy this thing.
Mm,
It was
mm.
really well done as well because they're just like, have at it, go ahead, you can beat the shit out of this thing.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, obviously, as well, due to the nature of when the film was made, it's pre CGI really starting to make its presence known in filmmaking. So of course it's all practical effects. It's all physical effects. The robot, I think, was mostly puppeteered. Um, Stanley did want to use stop motion, but that was going to prove far too expensive and time consuming. So it ended up with sort of elaborate animatronic and puppeteering. And I think that would certainly have helped with Stacey to be able to react in a very visceral way with this opponent, and to be able to have that, and of course the claustrophobic sets as well, everything
Mm.
being so oppressive, certainly would have aggravated, I think, that sense of desperation.
Yes, I totally forgot to mention, I don't know how I forgot this, is that we're dealing with like a post-apocalyptic world, so radiation is everywhere. Some people have it already in their bones and such. So she's really holed up in that kind of, in this room. She's got herself, she's got her art, she's doped up like half the time as well. So it's kind of like that kind of atmosphere is there. Speaking of the robot, the Mark 13, so Richard said that at that time, and like we were speaking before about robots in during that decade, a lot of it was like cyborg kind of stuff, your Blade Runners and the Robocops or what have you, Terminators. He wanted a droid that was all droid. He really wanted kind of like the nuts and bolts kind of thing, which he definitely got here. It's a really interesting team of people that came together to make this. So when you look back at it, yeah, Paul Catlin, who was the special robotics designer, he worked on Hellraiser before that, some of the creature effects and such. He would go on to be a concept artist and creature design for the Harry Potter franchises, a bunch of MCU stuff. Dave Keane was the chief robotics engineer. Chris Cunningham as well. Stephen Norrington, future director of Blade and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He was part of that team as well that kind of brought this thing alive. So it's very much this thing was on the set. They worked it, they made it, and on there. And it's so awesome sometimes when you look back in these kind of like indie films, how people kind of like establish themselves in these smaller films, and the ingenuity and the innovation that of these creations that come about it can launch themselves into the stratosphere with all these other kind of projects. And I think it's really cool how, you know, these guys kind of like came together, and I know the producer, one of the producers was just like she was like, they just were terrific, just on there all the time, made sure that everything was working. I don't think I haven't come across any stories about, the robot not working, like the shark not working or anything. I never came across anything like that. It was there, it was working, everything was cool with it. And yeah, I think it's a fantastically terrifying creation that's in this movie.
It is, it is. Although, I think Richard wanted it to be even more terrifying, so there was a little bit of compromise. But I certainly think the way it is portrayed and seen and filmed on screen really is a truly menacing uh, presence. So hats off to him for and the team for doing that. We know from other films that involve heavy special effects, you can have sometimes the best team, but if it's not filmed, it's not directed and edited in the right way, the special effects can look hokey. You know,
Mm.
I think he did. I think they did a great job with hardware. Definitely,
I especially like the POV kind of shots that they have with her as well. I thought it was really, really well done in this film.
definitely a
Um,
film of voyeurism. That's for sure. Yeah,
oh, definitely, yes. You have the actor. I'm just looking up his name here, who played the
Hootkins,
Lincoln character.
William Hootkins.
William Hootkins, yeah, as Lincoln Weinberg Jr. Very, very gross character in that film. Who
Oh
does get
gosh,
his
yeah.
he does get his upcomings in this film in an incredibly grisly, violent death
Mm.
in the movie, which there are several of them in this film. Um, I want to talk about the kind of like we mentioned before about music videos. That this seems like it is like a long form music video in a certain way because of Richard's background. Other people like Chris Cunningham, who, like I was mentioned before, worked on the robot, he will go on to do music video stuff as well, for Aphex Twins and other ones as well.
New
And then
York.
you have the these rock stars who are in the movie as well.
Mm.
Starting off with Iggy Pop plays Angry Bob. He's this radio DJ who's like always in the background, like kind of like a master of the madness that's happening in this
A preacher
post-apocalyptic
almost.
world. Yes, almost. Yeah, kind of like half Walter Concrete, half like preacher kind of thing going on. So one of the producers, Joanne Sellers, who I mentioned before, was a co-founder of Palace Cinemas. Palace Films, I should say. She said that she produced one of Iggy Pop's music videos in which Sam Raimi directed it. So she had kind of like had it in to get him to do the stuff in the film, which I thought was fantastic. And one of his songs also features on the soundtrack. And
Hmm.
then you get Lemmy from Motorhead showing up as a water taxi driver, who my theory is that he's actually Lemmy, who just became a water taxi driver because he's blaring Ace of Spades on the radio. It's like, listen to this band, he's throwing in his what is very classic Motorhead tune. Lemmy was in one of a documentary that was made for the film. And in very Lemmy kind of frank kind of talk, he said, and I quote here, a geezer offered me money to sit in the cab and read a bunch of rubbish for a bunch of rubbish for a bunch of money, so I did it. And that's pretty much like what he said. He's like, yeah, whatever, yeah, sure, I'll
Yep.
sit down, I'll do this thing. And of course, Ace of Spades shows up in the soundtrack as well. Um, Speaking of that soundtrack, not only do you have the Motorhead and all that, you always have a very kind of like industrial
Mm.
sounding stuff in there outside of Simon Boswell stuff. We'll talk about soon. The Ministry song Stigmata
Hmm.
is in it. Then you have this song from The Order of Death. The song, sorry, it's the song "The Order of Death" from Public Image Limited, which pretty much is like the theme song for the
Yeah,
movie.
I think it's used
Yeah,
in the opening and closing.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's just like the kind of repetitive kind of lyric over and over,
Mm.
and that kind of very industrial kind of driving background to it as well. It's a fantastic kind of like the needle drops in here are just absolutely
Oh,
fantastic. Yeah,
let's not forget also Fields of Nephilim. Stanley had directed a video clips for them, and he casts the lead singer from them, Carl McCoy, as the Zone Tripper, who we
that's right.
see at the beginning of the film, and so yeah, I think a lot of his heroes, post punk, industrial, hard rock. I think he was quite chuffed to be able to get as many of them in into the film. So yeah.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. And then you get Simon Boswell doing the original score. Fascinating career that he's
Mm.
had as
Oh yeah.
well. So he did scores for Argento, did Phenomena, going back to that. He did Jodorowsky, I think he did what was it called? And Sangre. I forgot the name of the movie that he did.
Sangre. Did no
Yes,
no
that's
did he do that? Oh yeah. Okay.
I'm pretty sure he did. I think he got BAFTA nominated for that one, I'm pretty sure. I'll double check here while we're talking. But also surprisingly, he did music projects with the Vatican as well. I did a couple of projects there as well. And
Okay.
then on top of that, he had his own kind of like solo albums out as well, acoustic
Yep.
stuff.
Yep. And
Richard
Richard
Stanley,
Stanley.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say he used them again, of course, on Dust Devil,
Yes.
the next Stanley film, which in some ways hardware pre-echoes, I think, in lots of some of the visual stuff that comes into Dust Devil, you can see in hardware, and so having that connection with Boswell, who loves to use, all manner of sounds, diegetic kind of stuff, or music concrete. He uses samples, and uh, he's great at that, at fishing out elements from different cultures to then apply to his sort of tapestry.
Just confirming Santa Sangre, yep, for Jodorowsky. He
Ah,
did
yep,
a
okay.
score for that. And on top of that, it's something that's quite funny as well is that because of the early work it did with Argento and stuff, Richard Stanley actually thought he was Italian. So he had no idea that he was he was like from England, from UK. So yeah, that's a nice little kind of thing
Mm.
there. So it all kind of comes together. I think they shot it in like over 8 weeks, $1.5 million budget. When it comes out, it actually makes some money. It makes like $5 million, like in the States, especially. 90 comes out in September 1990. So they supposedly there was a lawsuit that came after this as well.
Hmm.
So even though Richard Stanley kind of insists his own inspirations for the film was like, I think Soylent Green was a movie he talked about quite a
Yeah, Harry
bit, and
Harrison's Make Room, Make Room. Yep.
stuff like that.
Yep.
So there was
Mad
a
Max, of course.
yep. There was a short 2000 AD comic strip called Shock, which is SHOK explanation
Hmm.
mark. It was published in 1980. And Fleetway Comics brought a successful lawsuit that the film plagiarized the comic strip, and so a notice was later to add to later releases, giving credits to the strip's publisher and the creators as well. So
Hmm.
that was kind of like the first kind of like hit, kind of like against the film there.
Yeah, yeah. Look, there's no denying when you look at the comic strip, the comparisons are, fairly evident. And look, at the end of the day, all artists steal from each other. I suppose it's just how it's used and where it's credited. And I think it fairly Shock should have been credited from the start. And eventually it was. I think it wasn't until the DVD release that it finally got properly credited as the source of inspiration for the film. As much as Richard Stanley put so much of his own stuff into hardware, there is a very strong link to an inspiration from the Shock comic strip from 2018. Yes, definitely.
Then this other thing happens where so movie has a pretty big push. Like Miramax are kind of starting out there. They push it hard. It makes money. They had like 700 prints out there, which is kind of unheard of for that type of movie. And then from what I read here, it's kind of like a victim of its own popularity. They perform so well that a lot of people were kind of like trying to get their piece of the pie. So Palace Pictures were forced into liquidation by Polygram. They would then broke it up into a series of different kind of corporate kind of things, and then you have people like MGM and Miramax themselves, Buena Vista, all of them were trying to like grab this kind of thing, and because of that, I know Rich Stan was saying that before the DVD release in 2009, there was a ton of like bootleg kind of stuff out there
Mm,
to the point where things were like taped over and over again, that kind of like rustic red brown of the opening scenes like in the desert were like almost kind of like blue or purple by the time like people were watching it, so they couldn't really get the proper kind of like feel of what he was going with visually, which I'm sure would have been incredibly frustrating for him to be able to put so much effort into that kind of such a visually arresting movie like that for maybe a whole generation of people to have seen it and not in the best way.
I'm sure it must have been a shock to for a lot of people to finally see it in high definition, having viewed dupes and bootlegged. Sometimes that adds to a film's cult appeal. I think there's no denying that. Sometimes something that's sort of forbidden, or you know what I mean. You're sort of searching for something, and all you're dealing with is sort of rundown versions. It kind of almost suits the film itself. But I think it certainly helped when it did started doing very well for Dust Devil. It initially anyway that it gave him, I think, a lot of initial creative control, which of course he then lost as it went along. But that's another story.
That is, I mean, and if anyone hasn't seen it, I really recommend people watch the Lost Souls documentary about
Oh,
the making of Island Dr. Moreau, which Richard Stanley was involved in for like maybe like a week, if that.
mm.
Supposedly he used to read the book when he was a kid, like as his father gave it to him, and it was like a passion project of his. And that's what I kind of feel like. Just a tinge of kind of like sadness when I watch this movie, in that everything was there for this kind of big, kind of boisterous kind of career. If not a Hollywood career, like definitely kind of like a very kind of like independent kind of filmmaker, especially in the 90s, was just thriving for that kind of those independent voices. And he had like this movie, Dust Devil, and then when Moreau comes along, it's just everything just
I know, I
gone,
know. I
it's a
know
shame, it
it's
really is.
it's it is Miramax exerting huge control over Dust Devil, resulting in that mire of legality and again which version is the correct one. Finally, that sort of has finally been sort of rectified to a certain degree with Blu-ray releases, and like you say, of course, Island of Dr. Moreau. Stanley still vows he wants to one day make his version of it. He's worked on a script that, should he ever get the chance to, he wants to. Although, as we know, he's still trying to get the next Lovecraft film made. But again, those are other stories.
when we look back now, just 35 years on this film, when we think about it, just like in the overall picture of like kind of like genre filmmaking, especially that kind of sci-fi horror kind of thing, where do you think hardware kind of stands? I mean, for me, like I think above anything else, the innovation in the ingenuity of the film, especially in regards to the more practical effects of the movie, I think is just incredible. I mean, I listed before the people that worked on the film and their how their kind of careers kind of went, and they went to one success after another. I think it's just really an important kind of like marker, at least in the if you look into the timeline of that specific kind of crossover of sci-fi horror. That's a really, I think, when it comes to like overall influence, I think this definitely has a very kind of a, you can pinpoint that film of hardware right there and the influence that it has on that genre and other kind of things afterwards because of just the people that were involved with it.
Indeed, indeed, very much so. It's, it's such a hybrid movie of so many elements, and I think in that sense, and it has so much, like you say, so many elements, so many thematic kind of elements that lift it, elevate it. Although I hate to use that word, elevate it from,
Mm.
although it rests in an exploitation kind of vibe, a sci-fi horror thing. There's also so many comments on very prescient ideas that we're sort of dealing with, funnily enough, 30 years later, the authority kind of oppressive authority, fascism, and of course artificial intelligence, running amok, losing control, and humanity being uh, seriously threatened by, not only overpopulation, but also governments trying to take control of societies, and culture, and then of course that's what it hints to at the end of the film, with it being remarked that the government have now approved
Mm.
the Mark 13 to go into mass production. So, and it's like, it's quite, it's a very grim film, and the there weren't a lot of films, I think, quite as grim as Hardware was. Uh, a bitter message of hopeless grief.
Because some films like you have like what Verhoeven did with RoboCop's more kind of like in a satire kind of thing, and
Mm, mm.
Terminator very much like action adventure mold, and they had their kind of like ideas with some of this stuff as well. But yeah, thematically, I mean, there's definitely sort of like stuff in there that's still, especially like in regards to warfare and drone
Hmm.
war and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's stuff that's really kind of like prescient. Do you think with that, with those the themes and narratives and stuff like that in the film still very much present today, do you think it could be a kind of movie that could be updated for a remake or a sequel or some sort? Or do you think that Hardware is just its own kind of beast?
Look, one side of the argument is, there's always the possibility of a reimagining. Although, how much would it change, really? I mean, you
Mm.
might be able to make a higher budget film with slicker production values, but then essentially the core elements of that story, um, they they're still as important as they were then now. I think if you were to remake it, I can't really see an improvement on it, other than it being an overall, like I said, if there's more money, it being a slicker version of it. But
Mm.
we live in an age now where many films are aimed at a broader demographic. You've got the whole PG-13 horror thing. So I can only imagine that a high budget film remake of this would end up being a more diluted, tamer version, trying to tell the same story.
Maybe it's a prequel and see the creation of the Mark 13 as a concept. And I mean, the start of the film, the Mark 13 is in pieces in the desert somewhere. It's got to have gone there somehow, right?
Yeah, right.
Maybe that could be something. But then again, there was that prequel of the thing that came out. I think it was 2013, where we try to find out what happened with that wolf dog running away from the Norwegians, and we kind of see
Yeah.
that. I mean, it wasn't too bad, but like when you look back on it, it doesn't really bring anything that the
No.
1982 version had, right?
No, no. Other than
Yeah.
apparently they did great practical effects that they then overlaid CGI on top. So that was pretty disappointing.
Yes.
Um, so, I look, Stanley, not that I've read it, so I can't really comment it, but I do know Stanley did write a sequel to Hardware called Ground Zero in around
Mm.
2007. Like I said, I'm not really that familiar with that. I don't know exactly which direction he went with that, but he certainly felt like there was more to tell in that universe.
Well, until then, I really recommend people do try to check out Hardware. It's out now, like with a new kind of 4K kind of digital kind of thing happening with it now. So, it's like I said, like we said, it's gritty, it's violent, but it's an incredibly fascinating movie,
Mm.
and I think an incredibly important film in the overall kind of development of that genre, sci-fi horror, especially in the, like a 1990 release as well. I think it still holds
Mm.
up pretty well with the practical effects and everything. And Bryn Tilly, I just want to thank you so very much for your time today. Out there, for everyone out there, remember Dark Nights Film Festival coming up. I'm going to have the link in the show notes so you can check it out. It's going to be at the Randwick Ritz. It's October 2nd to October 9th, is that right?
October 9th to the 12th. Yeah, Randwick
11
Ritz.
nights to the 12th. So great films. It's a great program this year. And you got the 4K of
Brain Dead.
um, Brain Dead as well, and you got so many other great films as well. I really recommend people check out the program. Go get yourself a seat at the Randwick Ritz if you can, and enjoy some really cool horror, sci-fi genre films out there. Bryn, thank you so very much again for your time.
Thank you, Matthew. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.